live in Lincolnshire.
The LGBTQ media group, the GayTimes, has launched a new funding scheme to provide information to the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and queer community around the world. The project will begin by funding media organisations in Iraq and Jamaica. And we're joined now by Tag Warner, Chief Executive of GayTimes. It's
Welcome.
a recent
Morning.
job for you. Been in the post since January?
Yeah, beginning of January.
How's it going?
Really, really well. It's nice. I feel like I've been in the job for years, but it's been 6 months, which is nice. I think that probably, hopefully says that we've achieved quite a lot in that space of time, so yeah.
So what's your raison d'etre now? What are you trying to achieve? You're new in the role, and what do you want to bring to the position?
Golly. I think a new view of media in general, and that's actually kind of relates to the fund in a way. I think it's really exciting because we've seen a seismic shift in how media works. And of course, the kind of world of user-generated content means that we're seeing people talk about topics more. We're seeing stories that were traditionally not maybe reported on as much being brought to the mainstream. Really topical this week, of course, for our community with what's been happening in London recently. But I think what I wanted to do was really to see that trend and run with it rather than try and push against it. So see where we're noticing LGBTQ people in maybe more challenging environments around the world, and working out what they need rather than telling them what they need, listening to them, seeing what they're talking about, and then trying to support them to do some fantastic work that they already do in places where it's really challenging to be queer.
Including the likes of Iraq?
Yeah, Iraq.
Jamaica?
Yeah.
So what impact do you hope that your work could have in those countries and more?
We really are working for total acceptance, equality and celebration of queer people. And I don't think that's unreasonable to ask. I think in my lifetime, I don't think it's unreasonable to want to have acceptance of LGBTQ people in places like Iraq. And so some of the work that we're doing with our partners in Iraq, of course, is very different to what we're talking about here in the UK and London. The rights of LGBTQ people, the visibility of them, completely different. And so I think hopefully something which we're doing is, instead of saying, well, it's worked for us in the United Kingdom over the last, 30 to 50 years, so we can do the same in Iraq. It's not always the case, of course, completely different cultural settings. So instead of trying to talk about what we've done and take it to somewhere else, speaking to people that are from the countries themselves, queer people that live there, of course, quite dangerous work that they're engaged in, but talking to them about how they can navigate their own path rather than us coming in as the high and mighty and kind of saying, well, this is what you should do. Yeah. So really trying to empower people on the ground.
So how do you feel when you look at the front page of The Guardian this morning and the headline there, homophobic hate crime doubles over 5 years? Quite a depressing.
It is. I mean, a couple of caveats, I'd say. That's what's being reported. So absolutely, I think, fair to say that homophobic hate crime is not always reported. And I think the one thing that, I guess, looking at that headline, it's obviously really saddening and shocking, first and foremost. But to think about the fact that LGBTQ people in this country are more able to come forward and say that they've been a victim of a hate crime, I think is also something that people have had to go on a journey with as well. There's a certain amount of shame sometimes in talking about the fact that you've been in these situations. So I think sometimes when I look at these stats, I think, actually, has that doubled, or is that just the reporting number that's doubled? Because I think that actually people have been, on the end of hate around their identity for, as long as I can remember.
You mentioned, and just briefly, because I'm afraid we're running out of time, Tag, but in your lifetime, you want to see big changes, particularly in countries outside of this. Is that going to happen? How optimistic are you?
Incredibly optimistic, I've got to be. And I think that's something nice about hopefully bringing a new fresh perspective to LGBTQ media in particular, a huge amount of energy behind the role. So, yeah, very excited and always optimistic.
Good for you.
Thank you very much for coming in to speak to us. I have to say, this is the youngest CEO I've ever been, 25 years.
I feel like 100 years old.
It makes you sick, but thank you very much. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Still to come, all the sport with the other Emma, including...